Our final speaker this morning is yet another one of our own Army aviators. He is a former Program Executive Officer, Major General Bob Marion, who currently serves as the Deputy for Acquisition and Systems Management in the Office of Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisitions, Logistics, and Technology. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Major General Bob Marion.
As the United States Army prepares for the nation's future in a global security environment that is increasingly uncertain and complex, we acknowledge that the world has changed and holding technological advantage is no longer assured. We have seemingly returned to an era of aggressive competition between powerful nations which threatens regional security and international order. Our enduring mission is to provide our soldiers with a decisive advantage to prevail over emerging threats in the multi-domain battlefield. How do we challenge our conventional processes? By engaging with traditional and non-traditional developers and using creative contracting and collaboration mechanisms to encourage breakthroughs from the commercial sector. Our acquisition community recognizes the need and urgency to work more closely with our joint services, as well as our industrial base and partners in academia to facilitate effective, cooperative defenses in order to keep pace with the threats environment. Whether operations are on land, in the air, at sea, in space, cyberspace, or in the electromagnetic spectrum, we must prepare now to meet the future needs of the soldier. From the alpha of ideas and innovation to the omega of fielding and sustainment, we are responsible for enhancing soldier survivability and lethality on the battlefields of today and tomorrow. We reaffirm daily our responsibility to the soldier and our commitment to design, develop, and deliver equipment to enable our soldiers to complete the mission. Just as we have always called on the American soldier, we now call on innovators like you to ensure continued soldier dominance on the battlefield.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to be here at Quad A at another Mission Solutions Summit. I want to thank Quad A for putting on another first-class event and especially for inviting my boss, Ms. Stephanie Easter, to attend. As is usually the case in the building, something happens and senior leaders get pulled away, so I'm the benefactor. She asked me to attend, and it took me about one microsecond to say yes, I would love to attend on her behalf. So on behalf of Ms. Easter, thank you for the invitation to be here to say a few words. And I'll tell you, if you were listening to Drew Pappas's and Bill Gaylor's comments, if it didn't challenge every one of us, then you probably ought to check your pulse. What I heard Drew Pappas say was that the commanders that are sitting on this front row, the command sergeants major in this audience, and those CWABs out there, they're going to have soldiers trained and ready. They're going to be skilled, they're experienced, they're courageous, and they're going to be ready to go. When the question gets asked, whom shall I send? They're going to have soldiers out there that are going to say, send me. So all of us, regardless of where we are in this community, and in that little movie there, they talked about the acquisition community, and that just doesn't mean people with the alpha and omega on their sleeve. That's all of us. So whether you're writing doctrine at Fort Eustis or at Fort Rucker or at Fort Leavenworth, or doing organizational design or training soldiers at Fort Eustis, or no matter where you are, in industry as a prime or an OEM or on the second, third, fourth, fifth level in the supply chain, those comments should have challenged every one of us to do the things that are being asked of us so that when those soldiers say, "Send me," that we're ready. And they talked very specific things too. They talked about ITEP. They talked about Block 2 Chinook. They talked about future vertical lift. And throughout the entire Army modernization portfolio, there are programs that this community has to execute in order to be successful. And we've done it. This group of people, we've done that for the last 15 years. And so I don't have any doubt that when we're challenged, that we will respond. So I appreciate very much those comments, and I hope that you took them to heart as well. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for inviting Miss Easter and me to the 2017 Aviation Mission Solutions Summit. We recently commemorated the 100th anniversary of America's involvement in World War I. It's interesting how a decision like that to enter war mobilized an entire society. When we entered the Great War, our aviation fleet consisted of 55 aircraft, 51 of which were characterized as obsolete. In the fall of 2018, 18 months later, we had 740 aircraft supporting the war. So that goes back to my comment, when this formation is challenged to produce, we can do it. And I know we will, just as we did then and just as we've done over the last 15 years. So I'm proud to represent the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology and the Army Acquisition Executive, Ms. Easter. Thank you again for inviting her to this Mission Solutions Summit. Engagements like this with all of you further inform our plans and strengthen our partnerships. All of you know that aviation is the Army's single largest portfolio, and all of us, the stakeholders, are entrusted with the responsibility to execute that funding inside that portfolio. We must work closely together to deliver capabilities to our soldiers. We owe it to them and to our nation to execute our individual missions inside this portfolio responsibly, efficiently, and effectively. Aviation has a critical role in maintaining superiority over our adversaries by increasing lethality and survivability of our force, providing enhanced mobility into and within the theater of operations, and enabling unprecedented situational awareness and battle space integration. This particularly is a challenging time for our nation and certainly for our Army. Today, the Army is globally engaged with more than 185,000 soldiers supporting combatant commanders in 140 worldwide locations. These soldiers are conducting combat operations, deterring aggression, and assuring our allies and partners. In Afghanistan, the Army is providing critical enabling support to the Afghan National Security Forces fighting a persistent insurgent threat. In the Middle East, we're supporting the fight against ISIL, whose intent is to destabilize the region and, in fact, the entire world. Throughout Africa and Central America and South America, we partner to prevent conflict and shape the security environment. Our soldiers are assigned and allocated to the U.S. European Command, assuring our allies and deterring aggression across Eastern Europe. Soldiers remain engaged across the Pacific, where we have 20,000 soldiers keeping watch over North Korea. At the same time, we have thousands, as General Gaylor pointed out, preparing right here at home. So today is a more dangerous time than any other time since the end of the Cold War. Our global security environment is volatile, uncertain, and complex. State and non-state hybrid threats are increasingly capable and continue to narrow our nation's competitive advantage, not only on land, but in all domains: air, sea, space, and cyberspace. Our Army must maintain readiness for today and invest in modernization to ensure readiness for tomorrow. Challenges to our Army modernization have been building over the course of nearly 2 decades. Adjusted for inflation, the Army has nearly half the funding for modernization and equipment that it had just 8 years ago. Declining budgets drive difficult choices, and we have faced these choices over many budget cycles. Modernization has further been impacted by the Army's primary focus on counterinsurgency and counterterrorism for the last 15 years. Don't get me wrong, it was the right thing to do. It shaped a generation of leaders with invaluable skills and experiences. It also required trade-offs. The Army, fully aware of these trade-offs, made the right choices to support our soldiers for the missions and threats we faced in Iraq and Afghanistan. This kind of approach led to fielding of mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, MRAPs. It also increased the number of UH-60s in our medevac formations, led to significantly better personal protective equipment, and the rapid fielding of theater-specific equipment to meet urgent operational needs of our soldiers in our formations. We also invested heavily in unmanned aircraft systems. In 2001, we had 45 UAS systems in our Army. Today, we have over 7,500 of them embedded in all levels within our formations. It took us 4 years to reach the 2 millionth milestone, 2 million hours of flying UASs. It took us 20 years to go from 0 to 1 million and only 4 to go from 1 million to 2 million. So our focus has not been in vain on fielding capabilities that we will continue to modernize and improve over time. But again, the focus, rightfully so, on counterinsurgency and counterterrorism means, in terms of procurement today, where we're continuing to rely on the Big Five: Bradley, Abrams, Patriot, Apache, and Blackhawk. We developed these systems originally to provide a credible deterrent to the Cold War, and without question, those systems are still performing magnificently. At our current level of funding, we'll continue to rely on these platforms throughout the 2030s and into the decades beyond then. Meanwhile, our enemies have not been idle. The overmatch or overwhelming superiority our Army has enjoyed for the last 70 years is at risk. Our Army Vice Chief of Staff told Congress in February, "Our Army requires modernized equipment to win decisively, but today we are outranged, outgunned, and outdated." Each of us, individually and collectively, in the organizations that we represent here in this summit, should take this as a personal challenge to do our absolute best to ensure soldiers in the United States Army never face an enemy whose equipment is better than ours by any measure. Across the Army and over the last 15 years, we've continued to modernize capabilities and have done so incrementally with great results. I believe we're at a nexus in time, technology, and treasure that requires us to move beyond incremental modernization and, in some key areas, focus on leap-ahead capabilities. Time is not recoverable. While we've been at war these last 15-plus years, our adversaries have watched us. They've learned our strengths, our vulnerabilities. They've seen our tactics, techniques, and procedures, and they understand how we operate. In order to remain decisive against an elusive and increasingly capable enemy, we cannot wait to develop new capabilities, or we risk being too late. Again, as our vice said, we'll find ourselves outranged, outgunned, and outdated. So again, think about the Big Five. I just talked about Blackhawk. Done a great job over the last several decades, and is going to continue to do well for decades to come. But as General Pappas and General Gaylor talked about, it's time to move ahead to the next leap-ahead capability, and that's Future Vertical Lift and the Joint Multi-Role Technical Demonstration that will inform the requirements for FVL. So our Army and our soldiers need all of us throughout this entire enterprise and throughout the entire supply chain, all of us, to be at our absolute best as we execute the Joint Multi-Role Technical Demonstration and as we prepare to execute the Future Vertical Lift program. We're investing a lot of treasure, a lot of time in developing these capabilities for our Army. We have to succeed. Time is not recoverable. Second, technology. Technology is global, and many of us in this room remember when there was a clear line between friend and foe, and we used technology to provide a decisive advantage over our enemy. But those dividing lines have been blurred and complicated by the evolution of technology that has benefited both sides now. I spoke earlier about our exponential growth in the UAS So if you were watching that video, you saw Daesh or ISIL launching UASs and conducting strikes on Iraqi formations. So as technology has progressed, the threats have matured to the point where UASs now represent a threat to our operations. Our freedom of maneuver relies heavily on persistent air superiority, so denying the enemy from employing those low-cost intelligence and attack platforms against us is increasingly important. So I believe we're at a point now in developing those capabilities where we were back in 2004 and 2005, where we were very focused on developing and fielding counter-IED solutions. So that's where we are in the counter-UAS world today. And third, treasure. Two important components to treasure are our people and funding. The Army's collective strength originates from our soldiers, our civilians, and our families. They are our greatest assets, and I'll talk more about those in a minute. Let me first address funding. The Army's overall annual budget has been for years unpredictable. Case in point is the lack of a 2017 budget, and General Gaylor talked about this. We have a potential for a year-long continuing resolution that further exacerbates our modernization challenges. Our lack of a 2017 budget is keeping nearly 50 new starts across the Army from starting in 2017. Among those is the Future Vertical Lift program. So right now, our Capability Set 3 analysis of alternatives will not happen if we do not get a budget or specific relief from beginning. We also have 80 programs whose funding we'll need to maintain at our 2016 levels. And we won't be able to fund at our 2017 levels because we don't have a budget. One of those, also addressed today, is ITEP. So we awarded 2 contracts in 2016 for competitive technology maturation and risk reduction phases, and both those vendors developed schedules and are executing to that program. But again, their 2017 activity is constrained at their 2016 budget levels. So both those vendors this week will stop because they will exceed their 2016 funding levels. So we won't be able to execute our analysis of alternatives, and we will stop our ITEP program because we don't have a 2017 budget. So the net effect of a year-long CR means procurement funding currently on hold remains on hold, preventing the Army from immediately addressing known shortfalls and gaps critical to maintaining overmatch with our adversaries. Sustained, long-term, and predictable funding is essential for the Army to maintain current readiness and build a modern, capable future force. So we have 3 things that we deal with in the Army budget: manpower, readiness, and modernization. Of those 3, our Chief of Staff has said readiness is our #1 priority. We're also committed to maintaining force structure plans. So any adjustments to those 3 things end up being zero-sum. So there always has to be a bill payer if there's an increase in one. So given those priorities, our 2017 President's budget allocates about 60% to manpower, force structure. About 24% is allocated to readiness, so that leaves 16% of our budget annually to deal with modernization, and that's throughout the entire Army, all portfolios. So given those fiscal pressures, we focused our constrained resources on equipping for the near term to support readiness as our #1 priority, and our challenge is to take on starting new programs. We talked about active protection systems, we've talked about ITEP, we've talked about Future Vertical Lift, continuing to support JMRTD, while we're continuing to affordably execute our modernization programs, things like version 6 Apache, continued improvements to UH-60M, improved Gray Eagle, version 2 Shadow, all those things we have to do to stay ahead of a thinking, agile enemy. So the Army envisions, as General Gaylor talked about, a future operational environment where strategic responsiveness is measured now in hours and days rather than weeks and months and years. Our potential overmatch by our adversaries is real. Remember, think back to what the Vice said. Our Army's going to fight in multiple domains, not just on the land, air, sea, cyber, and space, as well as the land, where our adversaries are going to take advantage of megacities, complex terrain, things that we have to do to change the way that we think and the way we fight, as General McConville talked about. During most of our recent history, the only domain that's truly been contested has been the land domain. Our joint forces enjoyed unprecedented levels of freedom of action in those other domains. This is not going to be the case in the future. Our enemies seek to gain control of contested spaces and challenge our ability to achieve our objectives. So we're going to have to rely on our joint and coalition partners and continued development of those systems that we just talked about to enable and maintain freedom of action on the land as well as in all those other domains. When I spoke earlier about treasure, I talked about our soldiers, our civilians, and our families. And I talked about also our need for stable and predictable funding. But without doubt, our greatest treasure is our people. In all of our efforts, a disciplined, dedicated, well-trained, well-educated, experienced Army and workforces that you all represent in the formations that are here today, those are the formations that are critical for our success. The Army values and places emphasis on our combat formations and all of the formations in our generating force to help us deliver these capabilities. We also recognize the treasure that's resident in our industrial base, which is second to none. It's clear that the limited resources that the Army's modernization account has continues to present significant challenges for our industrial base, especially for companies that can't leverage commercial sales or for small companies that have to diversify quickly in order to respond in times of change. So when we develop equipment modernization strategies, we do risk assessments across our industrial base to ensure that we try to balance new capabilities, our incremental upgrades to our existing systems, and protecting critical capabilities in our commercial and in the organic elements of our industrial base. Still, we remain concerned about preserving key skills and capabilities in our engineering and manufacturing bases across the entire supply chain. So events like this and the opportunity to engage with you are important in our collaboration to ensure that we have both short-term and long-term successes as we try to deliver capabilities across time and across the entire Army portfolio. So we recognize that the business of delivering capabilities is a team sport across requirements, resourcing, and acquisition. It spans from design, development, procurement, testing, deployment, sustainment, and disposal of systems. The decisions that we make during design and development are critical so that we can continue to affordably keep systems in our inventory for the long term. Again, our Army needs this entire enterprise, all of us, throughout the entire life cycle of systems to be aligned with shared understanding and commitment during this critical time. As we celebrate our 75th year of Army Aviation, we can be proud of the role that Army Aviation has had in our Army success. We can also be proud of the fact that we are maintaining Army readiness in the near term, while we also ensure that our force is equipped and modernized for full spectrum conflict. We know that the security challenges of tomorrow are going to be met with the equipment that we develop, modernize, and procure today. In our equipping our force for the last 15 years, our collective efforts have been delivering outstanding capabilities to the Army. Our professional relationships that we establish and maintain at summits like this must continue so that we work collaboratively to make our Army better and figure out how to make the next fight one which we will dominate. Our lasting bonds of trust, respect, and confidence must continue. These close working relationships don't just happen, they happen because of hard work and discipline and commitment. We have to maintain those bonds and competencies as we maintain our current level of readiness while preparing for the future and its many challenges. Thank you for everything that you're doing to support our soldiers and the best Army in the world. I look forward to today, tomorrow, and for all the summits to come. Thank you very much.
Okay, that concludes our speakers for this morning. Just a couple things. As a reminder for the spouses in the room, the spouse professional session will begin at 11:30 in Bio B with the presentation on you, your genes, and your health by Dr. Nancy Cox, the director of Vanderbilt's Genetics Center. Also, remember, if you're looking for tickets to either turn in or purchase for the Hall of Fame or the Soldier Appreciation Dinner, go to the executive services upstairs in Canal A. And the Warriors to the Workforce is conducting a hiring event at the Network Exhibit Center from 11 to 5 today and from 11:15 to 3:30 tomorrow. So take advantage of that. And the Network Exhibit Center will now open. Thank you all for attending this morning's sessions and have a great summit. Thank you.